Hi, and good evening, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for joining us. My name is Jeff Oberl. I am the Training and Development Manager for Cadden Community Management. I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to join us and to learn about these important updates. We're joined tonight by Edie LaFave from Veridus. I'm going to allow Edie the chance to introduce herself and talk a little bit more about Veridus and their involvement in the community association industry. But before we do that, I want to go over a few ground rules for tonight. As you'll notice, everybody is on mute, but you do have access to the chat. So please take advantage of that. Ask questions along the way, participate during the presentation. I'll be keeping an eye on that to ask your questions along the way, or maybe hold some till the end of the presentation. If we run out of time and don't have time for your question, we'll follow up by email afterwards. If you would like a copy of the presentation slides tonight, just let me know in the chat feature as well. I'd be happy to email those to you later this week. So without further ado, Edie, the presentation is all yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. And thank you everyone for joining and putting up with my voice for the next hour or so on a Wednesday night. It is greatly appreciated. As Jeff said, my name is Edie LaFave. I work with an organization called Veridus. We do work with the Arizona Association of Community Managers, who is originally who we put this presentation together for. And really it outlines the work that the legislature has done this year down at the Capitol. As you can imagine, our legislature always tries to get involved in HOA issues and community management issues. So hopefully I can provide some context to what has passed. So we have our organization. I also work with Jeff and Jason from our team. I think some of you, if you've been here for a little over a year, you've probably seen their face on this screen instead of mine. So I'm sorry for the downgrade. But I wanted to provide an update, kind of what we saw past this year. So just for a little bit of background, I'll kind of give you a politics 101 real quick. The current makeup down at the Capitol right now, there are a total of 60 members in the House. 33 of those are Republican, 27 are Democrats. In the Senate, there are a total of 30 members, 17 are Republicans, 13 are Democrats. So Republicans hold both chambers at our legislature right now, as they have historically, as long as I've been doing this since 2017. So what does success mean? In order for a bill to pass and be enacted into law, they have to get a majority vote in both chambers, so 31 votes, just a simple majority in the House, and a total of 16 votes in the Senate. And then ultimately, they all need a governor's signature to go into effect. So how a bill becomes a law, if anyone has seen that Schoolhouse Rock video, I'm Just a Bill on Capitol Hill, that is actually a very accurate representation of the bill process. So, usually it's a constituent that comes to a legislator with an issue or idea. And that legislator, if they identify with the issue, agree with the issue, they will introduce a bill. It has to go through the entire House, the entire Senate, and then get sent up to the governor for a signature. Right now, we have, as I mentioned, a Republican legislature, but our governor is a Democrat. So as you can imagine, with both parties in charge in different areas, it can lead to problems. If anyone has turned on the news recently, I haven't heard of Republicans and Democrats working well together lately. And that holds true mostly, always an exception, down at our Capitol.
Hey, Edie, before you move forward, it looks like your screen may still be paused.
Oh
We're
no.
still seeing the cover page.
Okay, do you see it now?
Yep, we're on page 3 now. Perfect, thank you.
Perfect. I am good at talking and letting you know what's going on in the Capitol, not technology. But so a little bit about kind of bills going on down at the Capitol. There were a total of 17, a little over 1,700 bills introduced this year. That means I get to go through all 1,700 of those. And probably browse is a better word to describe it, but look through those bills, see if there's anything concerning specifically to the HOA community management world, and then alert the proper stakeholders when doing that. The number below, total bills passed, that means they passed out of the House, passed out of the Senate, and they made it up to the governor's office. So 360, this number obviously is significantly less than the 1,700 number. A lot of these bills get weeded out, more so like natural selection. They either don't get a committee hearing, they fail, they don't move through the process. The chairman of the various committees have a lot of power at the Capitol. The chairman get to decide what bills get heard and don't heard. So a lot of bills will be assigned to them, and they get to go through all of those and decide which ones they like. What are some determining factors in what they decide? It can be anything from, they don't agree with the policy to the sponsor of the bill is in a different political party, to they just don't like the sponsor, to really imagine any sort of situation. They could have gotten off on the wrong foot with the legislator. But generally that weeds through a lot of the bills. Bills vetoed. So I will say this is not an accurate number. This is outdated as of today. And we'll get a little bit more into this probably on the next slide, I think. But there were a total of 28 bills added to this. The House sent up 2 different versions of a state budget. And the governor vetoed all of them. So add 28 to that bills vetoed number. Bills signed is still 220. So, I do kind of joke about, bills not making it through the process, but a lot of the bills do make it through the process. A lot of them are not concerning to our industry. And try to, streamline business, make, small changes to statute here and there. Probably none that will impact us or we will notice in day-to-day life. And then days of session, we are at 164 days. The Arizona Constitution says that the legislative session should be 100 days. If anyone, knows kind of the speed of government, we don't do well with timelines. So we are 64 days past that timeline. Luckily, there were provisions put in our Constitution that allow for extensions. Really, the big deadline that they focus on is June 30th, which is fast approaching, which is when they need to have a state budget done. All right. Sine die. So this slide and the next slide go hand in hand. Sine die is when all of the lawmakers have completed their work, they've passed all the bills, they've passed a budget, and they're done. Our legislature is a part-time legislature. So theoretically, they are not meant to be there all year long. They go back to their district, do a lot of district work with their constituents, a lot of meetings and community engagement, but they are not there all year round. But for the bills we're about to talk about, the general effective date, they go into effect 90 days after sine die. So I told Jeff my newest prediction is Friday for sine die. So 90 days after that, I'm probably going to be wrong now because I've said it, and you guys can hold me accountable. But that's my latest prediction, which puts us in September-ish, maybe October. I'm bad at math. There's a reason why I'm in politics. And really the last thing that holds up the legislature is budget, and that is why we are still in session this year. There were two bigger issues, one having to do with education and one having to do with developmental disabilities that prevented them from starting these budget discussions earlier in the year. But that delayed them, let's say, a month or so. And so budget negotiations didn't really start in earnest until this month. And as you can imagine, getting everyone into a room, discussing, desired inclusions in the budget can take a while already. So it is hard when it's pushed back and delayed. So far, it's been interesting. This is the most unique budget process I have seen. The Senate and the governor's office have been pretty much in lockstep with what they want to include in the budget and have been negotiating and at the table. The House has not been there. The House is still had a different idea of what the budget they wanted to pass looked like. And ultimately, it seems like ultimately took themselves out of that negotiation. What has that resulted in? 3 separate budgets so far. So the House introduced a budget 2 weeks ago that passed out of the House, was basically a non-starter in the Senate. So what did the Senate do? They decided, okay, we'll pass our own budget. Passed a budget last week. And now the Senate or the House again said, okay, our original budget didn't work. We don't like the Senate budget. Let's try again, and passed a skinny budget earlier this week. That got vetoed today by the governor. So we're on iteration 4 of a budget. They plan to do it over the next day or two. And hopefully they will come to a resolution. They have to, I will say. Their one constitutional requirement is passing a budget. And so the fiscal year deadline is June 30th. So they're trying to get it done before then and prevent government shutdowns. Okay, the next few slides will be discussing what bills actually did pass in the legislature that are of interest to you guys and your professions. Jeff said it, but feel free to add in the chat any questions. Feel free to interrupt me that way because I am in the world of politics and we can talk. So feel free to sideline me. So the first bill, Senate Bill 1494, has to do with common expense liens and foreclosure and threshold amounts. So one of the common themes you're going to see is that legislators get ideas from their constituents and run with it. Similar to maybe when you have a disgruntled homeowner, one person comes to them, one person has an issue, and then they decide to do a state law that applies to everyone, just because they may not like the answer or, have their own view of what happened. So this came from a constituent that came to Senator Mesnard and said, the threshold for foreclosure amount is when, someone's delinquent in their assessment is only $1,200. And that hasn't been changed for years and years and years. And everything with the economy, cost of living, inflation, that doesn't necessarily reflect a correct amount in their opinion. Mr. Mesnard understood that argument and decided to introduce a bill. So he ultimately proposed increasing it from $1,200 to $2,000. While, yes, increases are hard, it makes it harder to meet, makes your lives more difficult. Generally can understand, the viewpoint where they're coming from. So like I mentioned before, chairmen of committees have a lot of power. And generally HOA bills go through government. So that is where this bill got assigned. Senator Mesnard went to the chairman and said, "Hey, will you please hear my bill?" Senator Hoffman, who was the chairman from in the Senate of Government, he said, "I'll look it over and let you know if I have any changes." The chairman then came back to Mr. Mesnard and said, "I'll only hear your bill. So this will basically kill your bill if you don't do what I want." Instead of raising it from $1,200 to $2,000, I want to increase that to 10 grand. So as I'm sure you guys know, that would be really hard to meet, to get to that threshold amount. And then he also decided to double down and instead of the current year that someone has for, an amount of time that has to pass before you guys can foreclose a common expense lien, he increased it from 1 year to 2 years. So he's giving people a higher threshold to meet before, they're delinquent, and longer to get to that amount before you can foreclose. So we had obviously a lot of concerns with that. But Mr. Mesnard wanted his bill to progress partially. So it ultimately passed out of the Senate that way. As we were in discussions with the chairman and Mr. Mesnard, we expressed how this can be really hard on the industry. We can somewhat kind of wrap our heads around, okay, we get there's, inflation costs that goes up over the years, but 10,000, it'll be virtually impossible for anyone to meet that threshold. So ultimately the bill that passed, it still kept the $10,000 threshold, but it did lessen the amount of time that has to pass from Mr. Hoffman's original proposal of 2 years to 18 months. So people will now have 6 more months of time before an HOA can foreclose a common expense lien. It's also important to know, I think, that as I'm sure you guys have encountered, you'll have someone that says, it's 11 months into their being delinquent, and then they pay $100. So they're paying towards their assessments and trying to kind of skirt that rule. We did clarify that any assessment or part of an assessment qualifies for delinquency, so that they can't necessarily get around as easy. So while the $10,000 number is scary, I would imagine, I'm also not an attorney. That's good to note. I can, give you the process and what the law says, but please contact your HOA attorney if you have any, questions along that lines. Please don't bring up my name in court. But I'd imagine you guys will probably now be focusing on that 18-month timeline, because that will likely come sooner than the $10,000. All right, any questions in the chat, Jeff?
No questions yet.
Okay.